consciousness can be used in various ways, can't it? I think. We certainly use it. Sometimes when we use the word conscious, what we mean is that we are aware of something. So, for example, is there a thermostat by the door in the back? Without looking, do you know whether there's a thermostat by the door in the back?
Yes.
Some people know, because they have to. And some people don't know, except it's been in your field of vision, almost certainly. Is there a little brass butter lamp kind of thing in front of Manjushri, who is behind me? Some people know, and some people don't. Now why is that? Because we might say, well, I wasn't conscious of it, I wasn't aware of it, I wasn't conscious that there is a thermostat by the door. Right? And this is a well-known phenomenon, of course, in cognitive psychology. Very well-known phenomenon. But whether or not we pick things up. And there are all kinds of tricks, and it's got different features and different versions of this phenomenon. But a general phenomenon is this notion that somehow being conscious of something means that we know that it's there. That in some way we can report on it. Another way we could say is, well, he fell unconscious. Meaning, he was knocked out. Or I could ask myself, last night I fell into a deep, unconscious sleep. And that's another way of using the word conscious and unconscious. There the implication is being conscious is somehow different from being asleep. When we're asleep, we're unconscious. Some would say. Now, these ways of talking about consciousness, noticing things, just think of that as having to do with what we might call a kind of phenomenal access. Meaning, it's something in experience that we can report on. So that's a particular version of phenomenal access which we often call reportability. Now, as we're going to see, that's a very thin, from a Buddhist perspective, not a very profound way of talking about what it means to be conscious. Extremely limited. Now you might say, therefore, that even though you didn't know there was a thermometer of it, in some way that there was a thermostat, or that there is a Martime thing behind me, a brass little butter lamp fellow behind me, along with Manjushri. We could say that somehow that had still entered your consciousness. And that would certainly be the way Buddhists would use the term consciousness. That the fact that you didn't process that material in a way that enabled you to report on it, that you didn't process that data in a way that enabled you to report on it, does not mean that it did not enter into your consciousness. It was in your consciousness. Now, additionally, we would state even further, from a Buddhist standpoint, that in sleep, you are conscious. Even deep, dreamless sleep, your consciousness persists. So one of the difficulties we'll have as we speak with science is realizing that phenomenal reportability as consciousness is a much less refined notion. But even the idea that somehow we're conscious only when we're awake and not conscious when we're asleep itself is going to be a point of disagreement. So we need to keep track of how we're using those terms. But one way we can think about consciousness in this context that actually aligns very well with, let's say, a neuroscientific account, is that the way Buddhists are using consciousness is to explain how it is that we have continuity. How do we have continuity of experience? How do we, in fact, have continuity even of the whole organism, mind and body? That there is something that is permitting continuity throughout all of these states, regardless of what is happening, whether or not we're reporting it phenomenally, whether or not we recall what is occurring. That continuity is something like, for example, the brain's continuous functioning. The brain doesn't stop functioning when you fall asleep, in deep sleep. The brain is constantly, as a system, as far as I understand, and I'm sure Richie and others will speak to something about this, the brain as a system, as a complex system, is constantly functioning. And if that complex system loses its integrity and is no longer able to sustain itself, then the brain ceases, and that's it. End of story. The brain ceases to function. So that kind of continuity of brain function, you could say, is part of what Buddhists are pointing to when they use the term consciousness.